The neighborhood had always been a quiet place. It's a kind of street where people waved from their porches and lawnmowers hummed on sunny weekends. For years he enjoyed that peace. He liked simple days, finishing his work, taking slow walks, greeting neighbors, and returning to a home that felt calm. He never expected drama because nothing like that ever happened around him. But that changed the week. A new neighbor moved in. He first noticed her because she talked loudly on her phone while carrying boxes from her car. She had a strong presence, the type of energy that made everyone turn their heads. Some neighbors tried to welcome her, offering small smiles or a friendly hello, but she barely responded. She seemed too busy, too distracted, or maybe she just didn't care. He didn't judge her for that. Everyone had different personalities. He simply hoped she would settle in and blend, the easy rhythm of the street. But the first sign of trouble came only 3 days after she arrived. He had just finished dinner and stepped outside to throw out the trash when he noticed her car sitting halfway on his driveway. He stared at it for a moment, surprised. Maybe she didn't realize. Maybe it was temporary. He decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, though, the car was still there. He needed to leave for work, and although he could squeeze out, it was uncomfortable and risky. He kept thinking that maybe she was in a rush last night. So later that afternoon, when she was outside watering some plants, he approached her with a friendly expression. "Hey, just wanted to let you know," he said gently. "Your car was partly on my driveway. Not a big deal, but if you could keep it a little to your side, it would help me get out in the mornings." She didn't even look embarrassed. She simply shrugged, said, "Oh, yeah, sure," and went back to her plants, as if the conversation didn't matter. For a moment, he wondered if maybe he had sounded too soft, or maybe she didn't take him seriously. Still, he let it go. Everyone deserved a chance to adjust, but the problem continued. A few days later, he came home from the grocery store and saw her car parked in the exact same spot. It's blocking part of his driveway again. He sighed quietly. He didn't want conflict. That wasn't who he was. But this was his driveway, his home. Something that simple shouldn't turn into a daily struggle. He walked over and knocked on her door. When she answered, she looked slightly annoyed, like he was interrupting her day. "Your car is on my driveway again," he said politely. "Could you move it a little? I don't want to hit it while backing out." She gave him a short laugh, almost a dismissive one. "It's just for a minute," she said. "I'll move it later." And she shut the door as if the discussion was finished. Except it wasn't, because a minute turned into 6 hours. Her car didn't move until the sun was already down. He watched it happen from his window, surprised at how casually she treated the situation. He told himself maybe she would change after a few reminders. He didn't want to be the type of neighbor who complained about everything, but the pattern only grew worse. Every week she seemed to push things a little further. One day she parked so close to his garage door that he had to angle his car carefully not to scrape anything. Another day she parked at the end of his driveway and walked away as if she owned the entire street. Whenever he tried talking to her, she brushed him off, giving excuses about being in a hurry or not finding space. It was clear she didn't care. Other neighbors started noticing too. A couple of them mentioned to him quietly that she had blocked their mailboxes or parked oddly in front of their homes. But most people were too polite to confront her. They thought the issue would fix itself. He hoped that too, but deep down he felt it wouldn't. One evening, while he was coming back from work, he saw her sitting on her porch scrolling through her phone. Her car was once again blocking half of his driveway. He took a deep breath, walked over and said, "Listen, I really need you to stop parking like that. It's been happening almost every day." She looked up at him slowly as if his request was something she could choose to acknowledge or ignore. "Relax," she said. "It's not that serious." "It is serious," he replied, still trying to keep his voice calm. "It affects my ability to leave my house. It's my property." She rolled her eyes. "It's a shared community area anyway." That sentence shocked him. The driveway clearly belonged to his house alone. It wasn't shared. She knew that. Everybody knew that. That's when he realized she wasn't confused or unaware. She was simply choosing to cross boundaries because she didn't think anyone would stop her. He walked away with a sinking feeling. It was frustrating. He wasn't someone who liked filing complaints or getting other people involved. He believed in talking things out. But this was different. She didn't want a solution. She wanted convenience, even if it caused problems for others. The situation reached a breaking point one early morning. He had an important meeting and needed to leave before sunrise. But when he stepped outside, he saw her car parked directly across the center of his driveway, completely blocking him in. There was no squeezing out this time. No careful angle that would get him through. She hadn't even bothered to think about anyone else. He pulled out his phone and called her. She didn't answer. He knocked on her door. No response. He tried ringing the bell. Silence. Her lights were off. She was either sleeping deeply or not home at all. He stood there in the dark, frustrated and stressed, wondering what kind of person thought this was all right. After waiting several minutes, he finally called a coworker to explain he would be late. It wasn't a good start to the day. Hours later, she came out of her house holding a drink, completely calm. She walked to her car, got in, and drove off without saying a single word about blocking him for half the morning. He felt something shift inside him then. It wasn't anger, just a quiet realization. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone who didn't know better. She simply didn't respect boundaries. He looked around the neighborhood, at the quiet homes and familiar faces. This used to be a peaceful place. Now he felt uneasy in his own driveway. That wasn't fair. And it wasn't something he wanted to keep putting up with. He didn't want revenge or drama. He just wanted his space back, the same way everyone else had theirs. So he decided to do something he had avoided for weeks. He began gathering every small detail. Every photo, every date, every blocked driveway moment. Not because he wanted to start trouble, but because he knew he might need proof soon. And for the first time since she moved in, he felt a quiet confidence inside him. He wasn't going to raise his voice or start a fight. He didn't need to. All he had to do was be patient, stay calm, and let the right people handle it when the time came. He didn't know it yet, but this small decision would set off a chain of events that would change everything on the street. The neighbors would soon witness something they never expected, and she was about to learn that pushing people too far eventually brings consequences. But for now, he simply stood in his driveway, took one last photo for his records, and walked back inside, ready for whatever came next. The days after that early morning incident felt different for him. He still tried to keep his routine normal, but something had shifted inside. Every time he stepped outside, he found himself checking the driveway before anything else. Some mornings were clear, but other days he saw her car sitting a little too close again. Almost like she was testing how much she could get away with. He didn't say anything right away. He wanted to see if she would realize on her own that she was making life harder for the people around her. But it soon became clear that she wasn't going to change. If anything, she seemed more careless than before. One afternoon, he returned home early and found not only her car, but also another small car parked right across part of his driveway. It looked like she had guests over, and instead of directing them to park in a proper spot, she let them use whatever space seemed easiest. He parked his own car on the street and walked up to her house. She was standing in her doorway, talking loudly on the phone. When she saw him approach, she covered the phone with her hand and sighed as if he had interrupted something important. "What now?" she asked bluntly. He kept his voice calm. "Your guest's car is blocking my driveway. Could you ask them to move it?" She glanced at the car as if the problem was tiny. "They won't be long. They'll move it when they leave." "I need to park in my driveway," he said softly. She shook her head. "You can park on the street today. There's room." Then she went back to her phone conversation without waiting for his response. For a moment, he stood there, staring at her door, unsure whether to laugh or get frustrated. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to create tension that would last years. But the disrespect was clear. This wasn't about space. It was about her believing she could do whatever she wanted. He returned to his car, took pictures for his records, and went inside. The street was quiet as usual, but now it felt tense, like everyone noticed the change. A few neighbors looked his way as they walked their dogs, giving him small nods of understanding. They had seen it too. Later that evening, when the guests finally left, He watched from his window as she waved them off without taking 1 second to address the inconvenience she caused. Her behavior had become predictable. She didn't care unless a problem affected her directly. Over the next week, new issues started happening. Delivery trucks could barely access his driveway because her car would be angled too far into his space. One afternoon, a package was delayed because the driver couldn't pull near the door. He had to walk down the street to get it, wondering why such a simple part of his daily life had suddenly turned into a challenge. One Saturday morning, he was expecting a family member to visit. He cleaned the house, prepared some snacks, and waited for them to arrive. When he looked out the window around midday, he felt his stomach drop. Her car was blocking the driveway again. Not halfway this time completely. The entire entrance was cut off. He stepped outside and tried calling her name softly, hoping she was nearby. But her lawn was empty. Her blinds were shut. Her car was locked. He knocked on her door 3 times. No answer. He didn't know if she was sleeping, ignoring him, or simply not home. His family member called him shortly after. They were stuck outside because they had nowhere to park or even pull in. He apologized and explained the situation. They ended up parking farther down the street and walking to the house. "Does this happen often?" they asked gently. He nodded, feeling embarrassed even though it wasn't his fault. "She parks wherever she wants," he said quietly. His family member frowned. "You shouldn't have to live like that." He knew they were right. That afternoon, after his visitor left, he sat at his kitchen table thinking hard. He wasn't someone who liked complaints or disputes, but being quiet and patient hadn't changed anything. In fact, things had gotten worse. He took out his phone and began organizing everything. Dates, times, photos, small notes about each incident. When he finished, he looked at the collection and realized how long the list had become. It wasn't just 1 or 2 mistakes. It was a pattern, a daily habit. The next day, something strange happened. He stepped outside to check the driveway, and he saw her standing near her car with another neighbor. The neighbor looked troubled, and she looked annoyed. She was rubbing her forehead while he pointed toward his mailbox. "You need to stop blocking mailboxes," the neighbor said gently. "I'm only there for a little while," she replied, her voice sharp. "That little while means skipped deliveries," he explained. "Some of us are waiting on important things." She crossed her arms. "It's not that serious. The mailman can walk a few steps." The neighbor looked defeated. He shook his head and walked away without arguing further. When she turned and saw him standing by his porch, she shot him a look as if daring him to comment. He didn't. He simply went back inside. But the moment confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't just his problem. She had upset multiple people on the street later that week. He overheard 2 neighbors talking quietly near the sidewalk. "She blocked my driveway last month," one man whispered. "She parked in front of my walkway." Another said, "No one wants to say anything because she argues with everyone." He listened from a distance. Realizing the entire street felt trapped by one person's stubbornness, the following morning, he experienced one of the most frustrating moments yet. He woke up early, ready to start his day, and walked outside with a cup of coffee in hand. He froze. Her car wasn't just blocking his driveway, it was parked diagonally across it, as if she had swung in carelessly and left it that way. He stood there for several seconds, staring. The sun hadn't fully risen. The street was quiet. He looked at her house, but no lights were on. He didn't bother knocking. He already knew it would be pointless. Instead, he simply took more pictures. This was the moment he realized there was nothing more he could say to her. He had tried being polite, patient, understanding. He had tried stepping back, letting things slide. But the more he let go, the more she took advantage. When he returned home from work later that day, he saw her sitting on her porch. She seemed relaxed, sipping something from a tall glass. He decided to try one more time, not because he expected change, but because he wanted closure. He walked up slowly. "I really need you to stop blocking my driveway," he said. "It's been happening almost every day." She didn't look at him. "I told you, it's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," he insisted, still keeping his tone gentle. "It makes it hard for me to leave my home." You're creating problems for me and for other neighbors too. She shrugged. Everyone's so dramatic. It's not drama, he said softly. It's respect. She finally looked at him then, and her expression made it clear she wasn't planning to change. Look, she said, waving her hand toward the street, there's plenty of room everywhere. People can figure it out. That was it. That was the moment he knew nothing would improve unless someone with authority stepped in. He went back inside, opened his laptop, and filled out a report to the HOA. He attached the photos, organized the notes, and wrote a calm explanation about everything that had been happening. His hand didn't shake. He felt no guilt. He had given more patience than anyone could ask for. When he clicked submit, he felt almost relieved. The next day, he received a message from the HOA saying they would review the complaint. They asked for a few more details, which he provided. By the end of the day, they sent a short reply, "We will handle this." He didn't know exactly what that meant, but something about the tone gave him hope. That evening, he stepped outside to take out the trash, and something surprising happened. A neighbor from across the street approached him. "I heard you filed a complaint," the neighbor said quietly. He nodded. "I didn't want to. But I didn't know what else to do." The neighbor gave a sympathetic smile. "You did the right thing. She's been giving trouble to a lot of us, but no one wanted to start conflict." He felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone. The whole street had been feeling the same frustration, just waiting for someone to take the first step. The next morning, things were oddly calm. Her car wasn't near his driveway. For the first time in weeks, he got into his car and drove out smoothly. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. She had tested limits for far too long, and the day would soon come when the HOA would take real action. She just didn't know it yet, and when that day came, the neighborhood would witness consequences she had never expected. The message from the HOA stayed on his mind for the next few days. It was short, simple, and to the point, but it carried weight. When they said they would handle it, he hoped it meant real change was coming. Still, he didn't expect anything to happen quickly. HOA boards usually moved at their own slow pace, taking time to review, discuss, and decide. But the very next morning, he saw something that made him pause. A small HOA vehicle was parked at the end of the street. An officer stepped out with a clipboard in hand and slowly walked toward the row of houses. Stopping at each driveway as if inspecting something, he watched from his porch, unsure if this visit had anything to do with his report. When the officer reached his house, he greeted him with a calm smile. "Good morning," the officer said. "We received a complaint regarding driveway obstruction, and I'm here to take a closer look." He nodded and explained the situation. The officer listened carefully, asking a few clarifying questions and making notes. Then the officer glanced over to the neighbor's house, where her car was parked unusually close to the property line again. "Is this the car?" the officer asked. "Yes," he replied. "That's the one." The officer walked closer, took photos, measured the distance from the driveway, and shook his head slightly. "This is clearly a violation," he said. "She's been warned before. Many times, actually. I caught him by surprise." "She has." The officer nodded. "We've had issues with her for months. Parking violations, noise complaints, misuse of community spaces. Nothing serious, but enough to show a pattern." He felt both relieved and frustrated. Relieved that he wasn't imagining things. Frustrated that she had been acting like none of the rules mattered. The officer took a few more notes. "We'll be issuing another warning today," he said. "But based on her history, the board will likely escalate the next step if the behavior continues." He thanked the officer and watched as he walked across the street toward her house. She opened the door halfway before the officer could even knock, as if she had been watching from inside. "What?" she said sharply. The officer remained calm. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you about your vehicle." "What now?" she groaned. "Your vehicle is obstructing a private driveway," he explained patiently. "This is not the first time. We're issuing a formal warning." She crossed her arms and let out a small laugh. "People here complain about everything. I'm not hurting anyone." The officer didn't react to her tone. Ma'am, you signed the community rules when you purchased your home. You agreed to follow the parking guidelines. Well, those rules are ridiculous, she muttered, and I don't have time for this. The officer handed her the notice anyway and walked back to his vehicle. She crumpled the paper in her hand and tossed it inside her house without reading it. He watched all of this quietly. She wasn't even pretending to follow the rules. If anything, the warning made her more irritated that evening. Received an email from the HOA. We have issued a first-step enforcement notice. We will monitor the situation. Please continue documenting incidents. It wasn't the big outcome he hoped for, but it was progress. He replied with a simple thank you and went to bed hoping that maybe, just maybe, the warning would make her rethink her actions. But the next morning proved otherwise. He stepped outside and felt his stomach sink. Her car wasn't just blocking part of his driveway, it was sitting right across the center again. Not angled. Not halfway. Completely blocking him just like before. It almost felt intentional, like she was trying to prove a point. A silent message that she wasn't scared of warnings or rules or consequences. He took a deep breath and reached for his phone. He snapped several clear photos with timestamps. Then, instead of walking to her door, he sent everything directly to the HOA. He didn't bother trying to talk to her anymore. Words had done nothing. Patience had done nothing. This was now out of his hands. By the afternoon, the HOA officer returned. This time, he came with another member of the board. They walked around the neighborhood, checking various spots. But it was clear who they were there for. She came outside the moment she saw them approaching her house. Seriously? She snapped. Again. The HOA board member kept his tone firm but polite. Ma'am, we issued a warning yesterday. Your car's obstructing the same driveway again today. So what? She shot back. It's not the end of the world. The board member exchanged a look with the officer. Ma'am, repeated violations trigger fines under HOA policy. At this point, we are moving forward with that step. She laughed louder this time. You people love your little rules, don't you? The board member remained composed. You will receive a written notice with the fine amount. Please review it carefully. She snatched the paper from the officer's hand and rolled her eyes as they walked away. Then she crumpled the notice too and tossed it into her house. He watched the scene from a distance, not out of joy, but disbelief. She wasn't trying to avoid trouble. She was collecting it. The next 2 days were strangely quiet. She didn't park near his driveway at all. In fact, her car wasn't visible on the street for most of the day. He wondered if the fines had finally gotten through to her. Maybe she was taking the situation seriously now. But then, on the third morning, the pattern returned. Worse than before, her car was parked not only blocking his driveway, but slightly turned as if she had rushed to stop exactly there. It felt like a challenge, a message, a stubborn act of defiance. He didn't hesitate this time. He took photos, videos, and made a short note explaining the situation. He sent everything to the HOA without hesitation. Within an hour, he received a reply, "Thank you. We are escalating this matter. Enforcement action will follow." He didn't know what that meant exactly. But he trusted that the HOA understood how serious things had become. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside to check his mail and found a few neighbors gathered near the sidewalk. They weren't gossiping loudly, but their voices carried a quiet frustration. This has gone on long enough. One neighbor said, "She doesn't respect anyone here." Another added, "I've lived here 15 years, and I've never seen something like this." They weren't angry at him. They weren't blaming him. They were simply tired of walking around her car, tired of her loud reactions, tired of constantly adjusting their own routines because she refused to adjust hers. He didn't say anything at first. But when they noticed him, they gave him gentle nods, understanding nods, supportive nods. "You did the right thing by reporting her," one neighbor said kindly. "We should have done it earlier." He appreciated their words more than they knew. He had felt alone at first, unsure whether he was overreacting. Hearing that the entire street felt the same way gave him a sense of reassurance. This wasn't petty. This wasn't small. It was a real issue affecting everyone. The next morning, we received another message from the HOA. An enforcement meeting has been scheduled. We will notify you of the outcome. He wasn't invited to the meeting, but he knew she would be. He could only imagine how she would react later that day. Saw her leaving her house, walking quickly toward her car with papers in her hand. She seemed angry more than usual. She tossed the papers onto the passenger seat and slammed the door. He didn't know what those papers contained, but he had a feeling they weren't just warnings anymore. That evening, as he sat quietly in his living room, he heard the sound of a vehicle outside. When he looked through the window, he saw the HOA officer again, walking from house to house, delivering notices. When the officer reached his door, he handed him an envelope. Inside was a brief note. We have issued final notice to your neighbor. Further violations will result in immediate action, including towing. Please report any future obstructions. He read the words twice. Immediate action. Towing. The HOA wasn't playing around anymore. The next morning, he stepped outside cautiously, half expecting to find her car blocking the driveway again. But instead, her car was parked neatly in front of her own home for the first time in a long time. It felt almost strange to see the driveway clear. For the rest of the day, things stayed calm, peaceful. The kind of peace he remembered from before she moved in, but deep down, he knew her behavior too well. This calm wouldn't last. She never backed down completely. She always returned to the same habits, and he was right. He just didn't know how soon it would happen or how dramatic. The consequences would be when it did, because the next time she tested him, things wouldn't end with a warning or a fine. The HOA had already made their decision. They were ready. All it would take was one more mistake from her, just one more push. And she was the kind of person who always pushed too far. The morning after the meeting with the HOA felt unusually quiet in the neighborhood. It was the kind of quiet that comes right before something changes, like the air was waiting for someone to make the next move. He woke up early, not because he wanted to, but because his mind wouldn't let him stay in bed. He kept thinking about how everything had built up over the past months, how one person's constant behavior had shaken the peace of the whole street, and how he never thought he would be the one standing in the middle of an HOA meeting trying to explain why someone's car was blocking his driveway. For the fourth time in 1 week, he went into the kitchen, made himself a cup of tea, and stood by the window. Her car wasn't there this morning. That alone felt strange. He had gotten so used to seeing it sitting half on his driveway, half on the road, like she owned every inch of space she touched. Maybe the HOA's written warning had scared her, he thought. Maybe she finally understood that things couldn't go on like this. But a part of him, a bigger part than he wanted to admit, knew better. She wasn't the type to back down easily. If anything, the warning might have pushed her to go even further. He stepped outside and took a slow walk toward the mailbox. The air was cool, and a few neighbors waved good morning. People on the street were usually friendly, but lately, many had stopped smiling whenever they passed by her house. Conflicts have a way of pulling people apart, even when they aren't directly involved. No one liked drama, especially not the quiet families on this street. But everyone had seen her behavior, and more than a few had been on the receiving end of her shouting or her parking habits. When he reached the sidewalk, he noticed a familiar sound coming from down the street. It was the engine of her car, loud, rough, and impossible to miss. He felt his stomach drop a little. So much for hoping she would calm down after the HOA meeting. The car rolled into view slowly. Almost too slowly, like she wanted everyone to notice her. She didn't look his way at first. She pulled into her driveway, stopped the car, then got out and slammed the door harder than she needed to. She stood there for a moment, pretending to check something in the trunk, but she kept glancing in his direction. It was obvious she wanted him to say something, but he wasn't going to. Not this time. The HOA had told him to avoid further direct conflict. And honestly, he didn't want another argument. But she didn't like being ignored. She finally walked across the lawn, straight toward him, her shoes crunching on the dry grass. He sighed quietly and kept his eyes on the mail in his hand. Even though he hadn't opened the mailbox yet. "You think you won something yesterday?" she asked. Her voice was sharp. But there was something else there too, almost like she felt offended. He turned slowly and met her eyes. I don't want to win anything. I just want my driveway clear. She crossed her arms. That's a petty thing to drag me into a meeting for. He let out a small breath. It wasn't just me. You've got 3 complaints in 1 month. It wasn't personal. But she shook her head firmly. Everything's personal, especially this. He could feel that familiar tension building in his chest, the same feeling he had every time she cornered him. He didn't want to fight. But she was determined to make this some kind of battle he never signed up for, she continued. Leaning forward a little, if you want attention from the HOA that badly, you could have just asked them to babysit you. Instead, you decided to drag me into drama that I don't have time for. He opened the mailbox to break eye contact, hoping the simple action would calm the moment. But she stepped even closer. He lowered his voice, keeping it steady. I haven't said anything except that I want my own driveway open. That's all. Well, she replied, lifting her chin. Maybe your driveway wouldn't be blocked if you didn't act like this whole street should operate on your schedule. That made him pause. He looked at her again, carefully this time. She genuinely believed she was the victim.
Oh.
That was the strange part. She didn't see how her actions affected others, or maybe she didn't care. But either way, she wasn't done. Before the conversation could get worse, one of the HOA board members drove by, slowed down a bit, and gave an awkward wave. She noticed it too. Her expression tightened. She hated the idea of anyone seeing her in a bad light. She stepped back. Just stay out of my way, she said, her tone low and tense. He didn't answer. No. She walked back to her house without looking back. The moment she shut her front door, he finally let out the breath he had been holding. The rest of the day moved slowly. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to her words. He couldn't understand why she treated everything like a challenge. Why couldn't she just follow simple rules the way everyone else did? He didn't hate her. He didn't even dislike her at first. But now every interaction felt heavy. Like he had to prepare for whatever she decided to throw at him next. In the afternoon, he heard knocking at his door. When he opened it, one of the HOA board members stood there, a calm older man who always spoke softly. Just checking in, the board member said. Saw there was some tension this morning. Everything okay? He nodded, though he didn't completely feel okay. I didn't argue with her. She came up to me, but I stayed calm. That's good, the board member said. We want things to settle peacefully. But she sent us an email after the meeting last night. She wasn't happy. You didn't need to ask what she wrote. It was probably a long message full of half-true stories and dramatic accusations. We'll handle it, the board member continued. Just avoid her if you can. If anything else happens, let us know. He thanked him and closed the door. A strange mix of relief and frustration sat on his shoulders. He didn't want to be involved in any of this. He didn't want to be the neighbor who kept calling the HOA, but if she escalated things, he needed some way to protect himself. That seemed like foreshadowing because things didn't calm down, in fact. They got worse. The next morning, her car was back. But this time, it wasn't blocking half the driveway. It was blocking the entire thing. Completely, he stood on the porch staring at it with disbelief. She was testing him on purpose. There was no way she parked like that by accident. Not now. Not after everything. For a few seconds, he didn't move. He just tried to make sense of why someone would go out of their way to create trouble like this. But then he remembered the HOA's last words, let them handle it. He took a photo, walked inside, and sent it directly to the HOA board. His message was simple. This happened this morning. I haven't spoken to her. Just reporting it. He didn't expect them to respond quickly, but within 10 minutes he got a reply. Thank you. Don't confront her. We're sending someone right now. Within 20 minutes, a small HOA vehicle rolled into the neighborhood. It wasn't an official law enforcement car or anything like that, just a marked vehicle the HOA used for inspections and property checks. But seeing it arrive made the morning feel surreal. The board member stepped out, clipboard in hand. He looked at the car, took several pictures of his own, then glanced toward her house. Is she home? The board member asked. I think so, he replied. The board member walked up to her door and knocked firmly. It didn't take long. She opened the door, and from across the yard, even without hearing the exact words, he could tell the conversation didn't start well. Her arms moved sharply as she spoke, her expression filled with annoyance. The board member remained calm, pointing toward the car and explaining something with slow hand gestures. After a few minutes, her voice rose, not yelling exactly, but loud enough for him to hear bits of it. "This is ridiculous. I control where people park. I'm not moving anything." And then the board member calmly said something that made her pause. He couldn't hear it clearly, but whatever it was, it stopped her mid-sentence. She froze, her mouth half open, then turned her head toward the car. Her shoulders dropped. She looked almost nervous. She finally stepped inside, grabbed her keys, and walked out again. She moved the car off his driveway, but instead of putting it on her own driveway, she parked it several houses down the street. The board member walked back toward him. "It's handled," he said simply. "But she's pushing limits. We're logging everything." He nodded. "Thank you." The board member gave a small, reassuring smile. "We'll take care of it if it continues. Or focus on your day." But he couldn't focus on his day anymore. Her reaction bothered him, not because she was angry, but because she looked scared for a moment. What had the board member said to her? What consequences was she facing now? As the sun started to set, the street felt heavy again. She didn't come outside for the rest of the day, and he didn't see her car return. The silence was unusual but peaceful. That night, lying in bed, he thought about everything that had happened. He didn't want to ruin her life. He didn't want the HOA to take extreme measures against her. But something had shifted. The situation wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about someone who refused to consider how her actions affected others, and whether he liked it or not. Things were far from over, because the very next morning, something happened that changed everything about the neighborhood and about her. But that was only the beginning of what the HOA had decided to do next. The sun had not fully risen when he stepped outside the next morning, but the soft glow of early light was enough to show that something was different on the street. He didn't notice it at first. He was still half asleep, holding a warm mug, thinking about how the past few days had been a whirlwind of tension, meetings, and unexpected reactions. He hoped today would be quiet. He hoped she had finally understood that things were getting out of hand. But as he stood on his porch, sipping slowly, he saw the HOA vehicle rolling down the street again, this time, much earlier than usual. The quiet morning made the sound of its engine stand out, and his stomach tightened. They didn't come around this early, unless something serious had happened. The vehicle stopped in front of her house. For a moment, he didn't know whether to walk closer or stay where he was. Curiosity pulled him forward. Caution held him back. Before he could decide, one of the HOA board members stepped out and waved him over. That alone was strange. They never asked him to be involved directly. He set his mug on the porch railing and walked toward them. The cold morning air felt heavier with every step. When he got closer, the board member lowered his voice. "We need you as a witness," he said quietly. He blinked. "Witness to what?" The board member nodded toward her driveway. "Look." Her car wasn't there, not just missing, gone. He frowned. "Did she move it again?" The board member shook his head. "She didn't move it." "We did." It took a few seconds for the words to sink in. He stared at the board member, unsure if he heard correctly. "You took her car?" The board member nodded again, calm but serious. "The HOA issued a final violation. She ignored it. The rules allow us to have the vehicle relocated when it obstructs property or repeatedly violates parking regulations." He felt stunned. Even though he expected the HOA to take action eventually, he never imagined they would go this far. "Where did it go?" he asked quietly. "To the storage facility we use for repeat violations," the board member replied. "We didn't want to tow it early in the morning without documentation. That's why we need you. You saw her car blocking your driveway yesterday. You reported it. We need confirmation that the pattern continued." He hesitated. He didn't want to lie or exaggerate. But the truth was the truth. She'd been pushing limits every day. He nodded. "I saw it." The board member exhaled in relief. "Thank you. That helps a lot." Before either of them could say more, her front door opened. She stepped outside. Half awake, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup as if she had just come out to stretch or look at the weather. She didn't notice them at first. Her eyes scanned the driveway slowly, the way someone looks for something they expect to see. Then it hit her. She froze. Her shoulders stiffened. Her expression changed in a second from sleepy confusion to disbelief. She marched forward, staring at the empty space where her car had always been. "What? Where is it?" she whispered to herself. Then she saw them. Her shock exploded into frustration instantly. "What did you do?" The board member held up a hand calmly. "Your vehicle was removed after repeated violations. You were warned in writing 3 times. She shook her head violently. "You can't just take someone's car. What is wrong with all of you?" He stood still, unsure whether to step back or speak. She looked at him next, and he saw a mix of anger and fear in her eyes. Not the usual sharp annoyance she always carried, but real fear. "You told them to do this, didn't you?" she said. "No," he replied softly. "I only reported what happened. That's all." Her breathing quickened. She turned back to the board member. "Where is it? Tell me where it is." "Safe," the board member said gently. "But you'll need to arrange a meeting with the HOA office to settle the violations before it can be released." She let out a frustrated sound, something between a scream and a sigh. She walked in circles for a moment, her hands on her head like she was trying to pull her thoughts together. "This is insane," she muttered to herself. "All of this over a driveway?" The board member didn't respond right away. He let her finish speaking before answering. "It wasn't just one day," he said calmly. "We showed you the documentation. This has been going on for months, and you ignored every warning." She looked like she wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she shook her head again and walked back into her house abruptly, slamming the door behind her. The board member sighed and turned to him. "This is going to get messy for a while, but we're following procedure. Try to stay patient." He nodded slowly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't satisfied either. Mostly, he felt tired of the back and forth, tired of feeling watched, tired of waiting for the next thing to happen. But there was more. A few hours later, she came outside again, fully dressed this time, holding a phone and pacing quickly. She was talking loudly, clearly upset. He didn't want to listen, but it was impossible not to hear. She was calling different people, trying to figure out who could help her get her car back. "No, I didn't abandon it," she said into the phone. "They took it while I was asleep." "No, I didn't sign anything." She hung up and called someone else. Then someone else. Her tone kept shifting between angry, defensive, exhausted, and desperate. It was a long morning. At midday, she finally walked toward his house. Her steps were slower than usual, less sharp, less aggressive. He opened the door when she knocked, unsure what to expect. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse, she didn't cross her arms or stand taller like she usually did. Instead, she looked tired. "Truly tired. I need to ask you something," she said quietly. He nodded. "Okay, did you really want this?" she asked, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "Did you want them to take my car?" He shook his head immediately. "I didn't ask for that. I never asked them to do anything beyond talking to you. I just wanted the driveway open." She stared at him for a moment, searching his face like she was trying to find some hidden meaning. Then she let out a slow breath. "I didn't think they'd actually do it," he shrugged gently. "They don't get involved unless it keeps happening." Silence lingered between them. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. "This whole thing got so out of control," she said finally. "I didn't think it mattered where I parked. I thought people were overreacting. But now?" She looked away, her eyes drifting toward the empty driveway. "Now I feel like I'm the only one who didn't realize how bad it got." He didn't know what to say. Part of him felt sympathy. Another part remembered all the mornings he couldn't leave his driveway because she parked right across it. "I didn't want trouble," he answered. "I just wanted space to live normally." She nodded slowly. "I get that now." Small, uncomfortable pause followed. Then she surprised him. "I'm going to fix this," she said. "I'm going to go to their office, pay whatever I need to pay, and get my car back. And I'll stop parking near your driveway. For real this time, he nodded. Thank you. She took a step back, then another. I'm not saying I'm suddenly perfect, she said with a faint, tired smile, but I don't want to fight anymore. He didn't smile back, not out of anger, but because he was still unsure how to respond. Instead, he simply said, "Good luck today." She nodded once more and walked away. The street felt different after that dashlighter in the afternoon. She drove off with a friend, likely headed to the HOA office. It was the first time he had seen her rely on someone else for help, and for the first time in months. The street stayed peaceful. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and quiet shadows stretched across the neighborhood, he sat on his porch again. He saw her return, this time being dropped off. She didn't have her car back yet, but she looked calmer, tired but calm. As she walked toward her house, she glanced his way, not with anger, not with sharpness, just a small nod. He nodded back. Nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes, peace doesn't come from winning or teaching someone a lesson. Sometimes peace comes from someone finally realizing they were pushing too hard and deciding on their own to stop. The HOA had handled the situation not to punish her, but to make her understand the seriousness of her choices. And somehow, it worked. Days later, the car finally returned, parked exactly where it belonged, and slowly, the neighborhood returned to normal. She didn't become overly friendly. She didn't try to make up for everything all at once, but she respected the boundaries. She stayed in her lane, literally and figuratively, and he appreciated that more than she probably knew. Life moved on. The street became quiet again, but he never forgot how one situation spiraled, how far things went, and how in the end, it took the HOA, not anger, to make things right. And strangely, he realized something important. Sometimes people don't need to be taught a lesson. Sometimes they just need to face the moment. When they finally see themselves clearly, and that was the moment everything changed.